and welcome back to part 16 of the GT Improvement course. We are going to talk about fractions, decimals, and percents and how to change one into the other. So an example of this is the fraction 1/2, which is the same thing as 0.5, right? If you have half a dollar, you have 50 cents, which is the same thing as 50%. So it's three different forms of writing something, but they all mean the same thing. These are all equal, okay? Now, why do we need to learn how to change? Well, because we're going to be doing operations with some of these things, and sometimes some of the word problems put two different forms together, and you're supposed to maybe multiply them. So for example, if you had a half times 75%, you can't do that. You need to change one. They have to be the same, either both fractions or both decimals, okay? Which leads me to my next point. We can't do a percent times a percent, okay? Because 15 times 30 is 450, and this is not supposed to be 450%. So don't do that, that's bad. So don't do either of these things. We need to learn how to change one into the other, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So what I used to do in my class is I had my students make one of these bad boys. So in the teacher world, we call this a foldable, and they have these little windows, and they tell you, for example, if you had to change a fraction to a decimal, exactly how to do it, and then some examples of how. So I mean, you don't have to make this thing, but I really encourage you to not write the how-to in your notebook, because it's going to benefit you to have this piece of paper separate from all your other notes, okay? Because you're going to be using this a lot, I promise. So I'm going to show you how to make it, but if you want to write it, at least do it on a separate piece of paper. You don't have to do the windows or whatever, but I'm going to show you how to do it anyway, because I used to call it arts and crafts times for my students. Okay, so what we're going to do, you're going to take your piece of paper and you're going to fold it hamburger style. Yes, hamburger style. And we're just going to fold it in half. I think you can see that. Fold it in half just like this. So get a piece of paper. Okay, I'm just going to fold it in half. Okay, and then what you're going to do is open it back up, and then you're going to take the outer edges and you're going to fold them into this center crease line that you just made. Okay, so I'm going to do that real quick on mine. Just fold them into the center. I have to put the phone down. And if you have colored paper by any chance on hand, there's some research on the brain that says it's better to use colored paper than white paper. It just helps your brain attach to what's on the paper a little bit more versus boring old white paper. Okay. So I basically just made a little trifold. So I'm just going to open it up like that. Alright, real lightly with your pencil, I want you to draw two lines. So we're just going to separate it into 1, 2, 3 on this side and 1, 2, 3 on this side. So I'm just going to real lightly draw my lines. And oops, one more here. If they're not perfect, it's not going to be a big deal. Don't worry about it. Mine are not perfect. Okay, so you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little squares on your thing. Next thing you're going to need is a pair of scissors or a knife if you've got a Gerber knife or something, I don't know. And then you're just going to cut where your lines were. I have to put the phone down while I cut so I don't mess it up. I am not a big arts and crafts person, so Like, there are some teachers out there that are just crazy on the arts and crafts stuff, but that is not me. It's not my cup of tea, but I think this particular tool is super helpful. So now you have 6 little squares with little windows that opened up, and I'm going to erase the lines on my thing because I'm OCD like that. So, all right, lines are magically gone. All right, the first thing we're going to talk about is how to change a percent into a decimal. So for example, if you had 25% and you wanted to change that into the decimal of 0.25, which is its equivalent. So how this works is just go ahead and open up your little window here. And what I did is I'm doing the how-to on the left window, and I'll do some examples on the right window. Okay, so I went from here to here. Okay, how-to, real easy. Step 1. You're going to move the decimal to the left 2 times. And step 2, you're going to drop the percent sign. Real easy. So for example, if you had 78% and you wanted to change that to a decimal, right now this is a whole number, so that means my decimal is invisible and it's right here. All I'm going to do is move it 2 places to the left, which is going to make it 0.78, and I'm going to drop the percent sign. So 78% is the same thing as 0.78, okay? If you had, let's say, 150%, 3-digit percentage, that's okay. Still the same process. You're going to move it 2 times to the left. It's right here. So you're going to go 1, 2. So this is the same thing as 1.5. If you had 6.25%, same process. Here's your decimal. You're going to move it 2 places to the left. 1, 2. Now you've got an empty space here, and what's going to go there? A 0. So your answer is going to be 0.0625. Okay, pretty easy. All right, so I'm going to close that guy up, and I'm going to go to this side here. We're going to go vice versa. Let's change a decimal to a percent. So if we had 0.25, that would be the same thing as 25%. And I think you can probably see exactly how to do that because it's just the opposite of what we just talked about. So here's the how-to. And oh, sorry, can't see that super well. Here's our examples. All right, how-to. Step 1. We are going to move the decimal to the right. Before we moved it to the left, now we're going to move it to the right. We're going to move the decimal to the right 2 times. And then step 2, you're going to add your percent sign. Okay? Move your decimal to the right 2 times and then add your percent sign. So your example, if you had 0.12 and you needed to change that to a percent, we're going to move our decimal 2 times to the right. So 1, 2. So that is going to become 12. And then add our percent sign. Done. We're just moving decimals. Okay? Let's do another one. Let's do 0.84. 0.8473. Okay, go ahead and move your decimal to, oh, I'm sorry, you can't even see it. My bad. My bad. Sorry. So for 0.12, we took our decimal, we moved it 2 places to the right, and it became 12% by adding the percent sign. For 0.8473, same thing, move your decimal to the right 2 times, 1, 2, so that's going to be 84.73, and add your percent sign. If you had 0.005, what do you think that would be? Should be 0.5%, so 0.5%. And then if you had one more example, 1.23, move your decimal to the right, that would be 123%. Okay, so for percents to decimals, decimals to percents, we're just moving decimals and adding or taking away percent signs. Okay, just make sure you always move it 2 places, not 1, not 3, only 2 places to the left or to the right, depending on what you're doing. Okay, let's go to the next box down. This is going to be some lengthy notes, so make sure you're taking your good notes. Let's do decimal to a fraction. So if you wanted to change 0.25, your decimal, to a fraction, and 0.25 is the same thing as 1/4, because in 1/4 there is 25 cents, right? We talked about that before. Okay, how to. Fold this guy up. So step 1. What we're going to do is we are going to read our decimal as a decimal using your proper decimal language. Your fancy language. So remember, we talked about place value before. So let's do an example over here so you can hear what I'm talking about. So if you had 0.6, do you remember how you would say this in your fancy decimal language? What place value is the 6 in? It's in the tenths place. So this would get read as 6/10, right? So you just created a fraction, 6/10. 6/10, 6/10. You just created a fraction. It is that easy. Next step, reduce or simplify if possible. So 6/10, can that be reduced? Well, you could start by reducing both by 2. So that would be 3/5, and can't be reduced any more than that. So that would be your answer. So 6/10, 0.6 is the same thing as 3/5. Okay? All right. Let's do it a couple more examples. If you had 0.55, how would you read that in your fancy decimal language? It would be 55 hundredths. So there is your fraction. This can be reduced. Both of these are divisible by 5. 55 divided by 5 is 11. 100 divided by 5 is 20. So 0.55 is the same thing as 11/20. Let's do another one. Let's do 0.75. Go ahead and do that one on your own, and I'm going to do it quietly on my paper. Please don't mind my barking dog. Lily, hush. So 0.75 would get reduced to 3/4. And we should know this one automatically. Remember we talked about dealing with quarters. If you have 3/4, you have 75 cents. So I would get in the habit of just knowing that one from memory. And I'm going to give you a list of equivalents that you should get into memorizing for your own benefit. It will just make computation faster. Okay, and one more I want to do. Let's do 6.5. So this would be read as 6 and 5/10, right? So 6 and 5/10. We just made a mixed number, which would reduce to 6 and 1/2. Okay, moving on. Let's do the other way around. Let's do fraction to decimal. And if I'm going too fast, remember, you can always pause, you can always rewind and listen to it again. Sometimes we just need to hear things more than once. Totally understandable. So fractions such as 1/4 to decimal. All right. So how to? So for fraction to a decimal, there's only one step. Step 1, we are going to divide the numerator. I'm just going to abbreviate and put numerator, num, by the denominator. It's that easy. So, oops, this. So for example, if you had 2/5 and you needed to change that to a decimal, we would simply divide the numerator, the top, by the denominator, the bottom. So top divided by bottom. So that would be 2 divided by 5. Which number, this is tricky, a lot of people mess it up. You're going to use long division. Which number goes in the box? The top number, the first number, always goes in the box. So 2 on the inside and 5 on the outside. Okay? It's not the bigger number, it's whatever number comes first. Okay? All right, now 5 can't go into 2. So what we need to do here is we need to give ourselves some zeros to work with. And it's really important when you're doing these to always know where your decimal is. It's there in the number, which means it's going to be right here in my answer. I'm going to give myself a 0 to work with. Okay, so 5 can't go into 2, right? So I'm going to put that 0. But 5 can go into 20 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20. I have 0 left over. So 2/5 is the same thing as 0.4, 4/10. Okay? All right, let's do another example for fraction to decimal. Let's do 1/8. Go ahead and see if you can set that one up on your own. So 1/8, that's going to be 1 divided by 8. So go ahead and work it. I'm going to do it quietly on my paper. Alright, so you should have gotten 0.125 for 1/8. 1/8 is the same thing as 0.125. Alright, let's do one more. Let's do 1/3. Okay, go ahead and set that one up on your paper. All right, you should notice a pattern for 1/3. This is a repeating decimal, okay? This is a repeating decimal. I want to give you one word of advice about using 0.333 instead of 1/3 in terms of computation. When you use 1/3, like say you multiply a number by 1/3, you will always get the exact answer. But if you choose to multiply a number by the decimal version, 0.333, the more threes you use, the more precise your answer will be. But for example, if you were only to use 1 3, your answer might be slightly off, especially depending on the number that you're multiplying it by. And we'll see some examples of this when we get to word problems that encounter it, but just be wary about using 0.333, the decimal, versus 1/3. If you use the decimal version, your answer is always going to be slightly off, okay? All right, last 2 boxes, almost done. I know this is a lot of notes. Next one is fraction to percent. So if you had to change 1/4 into the percent of 25%. Turn my light on. Kind of getting dark in my house. I live, I don't think I've ever said this, but my husband and I live in Haleiwa. We have a little rental unit down by Lonnie Beach, which is also known as Turtle Beach. And this is my view that I get from my desk. So we've got the ocean over there. It's a very, very tiny apartment, but it's right by the beach, so we make do. Okay, sorry, back to work. Okay, how to. So step 1, we are going to divide the numerator, the top, by the denominator, the bottom, using long division. Okay, so let's get an example here. Let's do 1/25. So it's very similar to what we just did over here with changing a fraction into a decimal. It's just one additional step. So step 1, we are going to divide the numerator by the denominator. So that is 1 divided by 25, and we just went over how to do that. 1 goes in the box, 25 on the outside. You're going to need to give yourself some zeros to work with. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this first. Go ahead and do it on your paper. I'll do it on mine. All right, should have ended up with 0.04. The next step, so we've got a decimal. The next step is just we need to change this decimal into a percent. And if you remember up here, decimal to percent, all we did was move the decimal point 2 places to the right. So that is step number 2. Move decimal 2 times to the right, and then we have to add the percent sign. So move decimal 2 times to the right, that would be 1 2, so this would be 4%. Almost went off the page there. All right, so 1/25 is the same thing as 4%. Okay, let's do another example. Let's do let's do 4/5. See if you can set that one up on your own. I'm going to do it quietly on my paper. Alright, so when you did your division, you should have ended up with 0.8, and then when you move your decimal to the right 2 times, you have an empty space here, which a 0 goes, so that becomes 80%. Okay? Alright, last box. Percent to fraction. So, for example, 25%, how would we change that into the fraction of 1/4? All right. So, how to? I really need to get better about my so's. I'm sorry. Let's talk about what percent means real quick. Percent means out of 100. That's literally what it translates to, out of 100. So if I say I have 38%, that would translate to 38 out of 100. Okay? So it's real easy. All we're going to do, step 1. And let me give you some examples. Sorry. Examples. Oops. Examples that you can see. All right. For example, if you had 80%, percent means out of 100, so that would simply translate to 80 out of 100. Okay? So step 1, put the number of your percent over 100. It's that easy. Step 2, we have a fraction already now here. Now all we need to do is reduce. So I can cancel common zeros. So that would be 8/10. 8/10 can be reduced again to 4/5. Okay? So all you do is put the number over 100, simplify if possible, and there's your answer. So step 2 is simplify if possible. If you had a percent like 125%, what I would do in this case, if you have a triple digit percentage, I would change this to a decimal first. So your decimal is here, move it to the left twice, so that would give you 1.25. Now if you were to read that in your fancy decimal language, that would be 1 and 25 hundredths. Now you have a fraction that you can reduce, so divide by 25. So that would be 1 and 1/4. Okay? So if you have a triple digit, I would just change that to a decimal. You could even do that with these ones too. You could change this to 0.8, and then you would read that as 8/10, right? It's the same thing. But for like the 2-digit numbers, like if you had 14%, I just put it over 100. And divide that by 2, divide by 2. That would be 7/50. Okay? All right, that is it for your notes. I hope you enjoyed making your little arts and craft project situation. I promise it's worth it. You're gonna need this more often than you think, and it's going to be easier to find if it's separate from your big book of notepad paper, okay? We're gonna make a list on the back. Actually, you're gonna make a list on the back, just like this one. And what All right, with these percentages, decimals, fractions, these are all equivalent. I would, if I were you, I would make some flashcards, maybe using some 3x5 cards or whatever, and just drill yourself on these equivalents and just know these like you know your name, okay? It'll just make computation so much faster if you can just get it out there in 1 second versus having to actually do all this work for not all of them, but for these super common ones, okay? All right, oops, sorry. All right, that's it for this video. We'll do a review of this when we go at the next video, and that's it. Have a great day. Bye.